talking about today is project management in general. And there's the key aspects of project management. It's a little bit of magic, a little bit of skill, and a lot of knowledge and information. So the thing about project management, it's all about scope, understanding what was scoped as far as effort is concerned, what was scoped as far as the margin is concerned, because we all know when there's some kind of deal being put together, there's a price list that people are trying to hit, and then identifying the types of resources that are going to do that work, which at the end of the day gives you the margin that you're going to work with on the project. And that, of course, also gives you your budget. So you as a project manager are, in many cases, inheriting this group of items from the scoping exercise that happened during the sales cycle, which was the effort, the margin, and the budget of the project. So in addition to those scopes, you actually have to measure and monitor how you're doing against those scopes, because it's one thing to scope something, it's another to deliver it. And ideally in a great world, those all go hand in hand and everything is smooth. But we all have done project management. We know it's a little bit more challenging than that. So you really have to have your radar up and measure things like the cost of your resources and how much money you're spending on expenses versus the budgets you've been given. How fast are you burning against the budget versus the work that you're finishing? And the forecasting of all those budgets as far as where am I going to end up at the end of the project? Is that within the budget? Am I going to come in under? Am I going to go over? And forecasting itself is a little bit of an art. And so that falls on the shoulders of the PMs many times because they're trying to manage to the specific component of what was sold from an engagement. And finally, in past webinars, we've talked about those project management measurement techniques, things like estimate to complete, estimate at completion, earned value management. Those are all items that are measures that will help you understand how you're burning against the project. Are you burning hot or cold against that project? So PMs really need a plan of attack. So half of the project schedule, half of the battle for the plan is the schedule. So it's our little blue guys there. And the other half of the plan is the resources that you need. So you need to figure out how you're going to deliver and who's going to do the delivering. And once you put those two pieces of the battle together, you've got the whole battle plan in place. And then you want to lock that battle plan down. You want to capture everything in a cage with something called a baseline. And that gives you, here's what I originally scheduled and planned out and am expecting to deliver, because this matches as close as I can get with the scope that was done and what I'm expecting to do from a delivery perspective in the system. So this whole theme on this webinar is really project managers are sort of the captain of the battle. They're trying to the general of the battle. They're trying to orchestrate the battle, trying to win the battle, trying to be victorious. So how are you planning that out? How are you going to plan to execute on that and conquer the battle plans that are in place? Now the visibility of the battle is really what I call the forecasting piece of it. So you can put your plan in place. This is how you're going to execute. These are the resources you're going to need. These are the tasks you're going to deliver. These are the dates you're going to hit. This is the expenses and the materials you're going to need. These are the milestones that will keep you in check. So that plan is great, and day one when you finish writing that first project plan, it's a utopia. This is exactly how it's going to work, and there will be no issues. And the reality is we have to continually look forward. We have to be on the lookout. We need a scout out there. We need ourselves out there. We need something in our fingertips to be able to look for information about projects. So forecasting is one of those aspects. We want to understand what's happening and what's coming along the way. So we're anticipating the risks and adjusting the plan as we go. So things that forecasting gives us information about is, are we running out of budget? Do we still need resources? Are we expecting to burn a certain number of hours or meet a certain deliverable, but we still don't have anyone even on the project to do that? That's a huge flag right there, because from a forecasting perspective and that measure, you're able to see if you still need those key resources in order to meet that deliverable. And on the task plans, are you in a situation where you're starting to have to add more tasks, more integration work, for example, in software systems, more documentation in training situations, things that you hadn't expected because now we're going over the scope of what was put in place. So how are you going to deal with those scope changes? How are you going to understand what needs to happen from a project plan? And then are the deadlines changing? So are you in a situation where it doesn't look like we're going to deliver fast enough, so we need to adjust the target dates and the deadlines for those projects? Or is the customer not ready? We're moving too fast and the customer is having to catch up, so it's never good to not be in sync with your customer. So are the deadlines changing so we have an anticipation of when things will get done or when the customer needs something? And then finally, are you missing your margin targets? So that's a big one for services organizations in general. You certainly want to keep the customer happy. You want to stay on track with targets and timelines. You want to make sure you have good staff. But at the end of the day, from a business perspective, you also have to make sure that you're delivering within a cost budget or a margin target that you have for the project, because that's how the whole scope came to be. Not what needs to be delivered, but how can we deliver that in a profitable way so that it benefits both the customer and for the company. So the visibility of the battle is that forecasting metric. And the forecasting metric can be something as simple as just forecasting the number of hours that people are going to deliver. It can be much more complicated, where there's bottom-up calculations of bill rates and cost rates and hours and expected spend of expenses, and all of those come together to give you that forecast of your cost versus your income, for example. And then there's the adapt and regroup measure. So the adapt and regroup measure is, okay, how do I know where I'm at? How do I know where I'm going? And how do I know what I need to take action on? So ETC and EAC are two adapt and regroup metrics that you could take a look at. And these are sort of game changer metrics that you want to take a look and measure against what you're running and how you're running the play or the battle plan, so to speak, and how you're going to continue to move things around, shift things, understand where you need to flank or versus not. So ETC is estimate to complete. That is what is left to deliver. And that can be kind of subjective, honestly, because there's certain things like giving yourself 100 hours of budget. You have spent 40. The ETC is 60 because the estimate to complete is 60. But that's not actually what ETC means. ETC is not necessarily budget remaining. ETC is what will it take to deliver the rest of this project. So in my example of the 100 hours and the 40 hours delivered, 60 hours is what's remaining. But is the ETC 60 hours? Is it 70 hours? Is it 50 hours? Because that metric alone tells me how much more do I have to go, and then that gives me a bigger picture of what is it going to look like at the end of the day. So is it, are we going to at the end of the project go over budget? Are we going to come in under budget? So that ETC contributes to what's called EAC, estimate at completion. And estimate at completion is the simple math of estimate to complete and plus the actuals to date. And that's a really helpful metric, especially at the end of the project when you're at that time it's sort of actuals at the end of the project, but as you're delivering the project, you're watching that EAC, and then at the end of the project you can kind of see that actuals versus plan and understand if that needs to impact or influence how the forecasting or the scoping happens the next time around when this project is done. So EAC is one of those in-process metrics that eventually turns into a final number, and it's really meant to give you as much of a proactive view as possible on what it's taking to deliver this project. Okay. As you are collecting your ETC, EAC information, you're comparing that to the baseline. So you're understanding whether you're burning hot or burning cold. Does it look like you're spending more time in a certain area than you expected according to your baseline plan? So the baseline continually becomes this sort of bang it up against the baseline to understand what's changed, and do I need to see any kind of take any kind of reactive or proactive action in that sense. Now, another twist to the ETC EAC is this earned value management. So we did a webinar on that like a couple months ago or last month. And earned value management is a whole nother metric that basically gives you this sort of schedule index and cost performance index to let you know whether you're burning hot or burning cold, you're burning ahead of schedule, you're burning behind schedule. And that all has some algorithms behind it to let you know based on the trending of where you're going against your original plan or baseline, are you sort of, are you veering off track? How can you recover? So EVM is a more comprehensive view versus the ETC EAC, but these are both very key metrics in the delivery of projects to make sure that you have a way to adapt and regroup as you're going through the delivery of a project. Okay. So I thought what I would do is talk about sort of how you have to keep in touch, how you have to have sort of that sentry out in the field that's making sure they understand what's being delivered, what's not being delivered, where are we at from completion, work completion, where are we at from deliverables and target dates. And so I always think of project delivery as 4 basic components of measures. So there's hours that you have to deliver, especially when it's a services project, like what's the hours that have been estimated, the types of resources that have been estimated. And those hours-based reports tend to be, a lot of it is baseline versus plan and versus actual. So what did I expect to burn? What am I currently planning to burn? What have I actually burned? And those 3 metrics work together to figure out how we're going to make sure that we're on track with delivery. Okay. The next set of hours that are key are billable versus non-billable. So this is where you're delivering the project, but you're also having to understand how much of an investment you're making as you're delivering the project. So this might have never been the plan. You never planned to spend non-billable hours, but you certainly run into a situation where you find yourself giving away some hours, maybe having to track some shadowing hours based on somebody you're bringing on who's new. Those are all good metrics to understand what the total cost and the investment has been on this project. And some of those non-billable hours are things that have to be considered the next time you do estimation. And some of those non-billable hours are really just an indication that you're using resources that don't have the full skill set. So you're using it as a training exercise as well, and you certainly don't want to hurt the profitability of the project or at least hurt the budget to the customer with those hours. The other hours-based metric that I like to look at is the remaining hours versus the budget. So this is your ETC in your remaining hours view. So I have 100 hours, I've delivered 40, I have 60 hours left, but is that going to get us to the end? Is that my hours remaining to really be able to, my estimate to complete to really deliver that project? So those are all very unique hours-based reports, all very valuable, all answer a different question. And one of the things that I'm big on is writing a report for report writing's sake and seeing the data for data review's sake isn't really worthwhile. The report that you write has to answer a question. So what question are you asking in the organization, and that report is necessary. So these are 3 key reports that I believe project managers should have in their toolkit, regardless of whether they're doing fixed fee projects or T&M projects. Or like unit billing projects, things like that. You need to understand sort of the hours plan because those are all labor and services-based organizations. Now these schedule-based reports, depending on how you do your scheduling, you'll want to understand how you're keeping on track with scheduling. So in some PSA tools and some techniques, the schedule is actually a cost schedule. So if I plan to burn $100 worth of cost and I only burn 90, then I'm behind schedule. And when I mean schedule-based reports, I'm actually meaning date-based reports. So were we supposed to hit this deliverable on the 15th? It's the 17th now. Did we meet it? Yes or no? And if I haven't met it, I would want a report that says, by the way, we're behind on this task or we're behind on this milestone. So having a late task report so that you could look really healthy on hours and find out you're missing all your deadlines. And to me that says I'm actually going to go over budget, because if I'm good on budget but I haven't delivered the work in that ratio correctly, then I'm going to have to invest more time to catch up. Okay. There's also a baseline versus plan versus actual schedule. And this is different than the hours. So the hours is how I'm expecting to deliver it, but the schedule is when I'm expecting to deliver it. So if you targeted to finish a deliverable by the end of June and now it slips to July, that may be simply because the customer asked the project to go on hold, or there's vacations you have to work around, and you're not expecting to burn any extra budget, but you are adjusting the task plan and the schedule date. So that very well could be a very different report from the hours that you're measuring. And then finally, the milestone variance. So did we say we could try and get OpenAir up and running in 3 weeks? Well, it ended up taking 6 weeks. Why is that? What happened with that milestone? Is it because we just took longer to do testing? Is it that we were doing training? Is it that we scheduled it around July 4th, which was never a good time since everyone's on vacation? So that milestone variance is a good metric as well to understand based on the phasing of the approach and the gate controls you have in place. Is that something that's realistic for you to meet? So those are hours and schedules, but then there's the whole financial component of it. And this is where project management sort of spans, being a project manager in today's world, you need lots of information, and lots of information means you're actually knowing more than just perhaps what you may have done in other jobs where you're like, okay, I've got 10 hours, let me just spend 10 hours. But now it's, let me spend 10 hours of this type of resource because there's a cost to that resource. So how do I manage that cost to that resource and the plan of that cost? So can I find resources that are cheaper? Can I go and get a subcontractor? What does that do to my bottom line? Is it better for me to trade off scheduling a later date and use employees versus going out and getting an expensive contractor? Or are the contractors cheaper than my employees? So these are all the financial base, have a lot of cost factors to consider, as well as sort of what is my expected spend on this project versus how much have I spent on this project. So you can see I focus a lot on the cost in the 3 or 4 reports that I mentioned here on the slide. But there's also a financial component to the forecast. So am I forecasting to spend more money with the customer than I expected? So is the customer going to have to pay more? Is there a cap that I have to manage to? So therefore I'm going to have to see about getting change orders. So these financial-based reports are good ways to kind of keep on, to actually keep on track of what's going on from a performance of the project. You could be on track and hit all of the hours, but if you went and spent money on, sort of the top dog, you probably didn't make your margin. So these 3 things work together as far as keeping the project as you scoped it on track. And then finally, work completion. So work completion is a hard one, I think, to really measure effectively because it's very subjective. If you're writing a book, you may not know how many pages that book's going to be, so you have to kind of gut feel it to say, I think I'm about 50% done with the book. And you find out the 100 pages you just wrote is only a tenth of it because the book ended up being 1,000 pages long. Sometimes you just really can't gauge how much work is really complete. Some of you may be working with delivery projects that make it much more agreeable. There's checkboxes, or there's, you turn in certain measures or reports, and those are very easy to say, yep, this is done, yep, this is done, yep, this is done, work complete. But the other half of you are probably out there saying, yeah, it's really sort of an intangible thing. So the work percent complete is a little harder to nail down, and that is up to you as a PM to sort of gauge that. And many times people will fall back on metrics because the metrics give them numbers that can support their estimations. So I thought I would take some examples and kind of walk through how the hours reports alone can tell a big story. So if we take each of these, like Project W, let's say that we baseline Project W as 100 hours, and we're planning to only deliver 90. So that alone, those 2 numbers alone tell me that I'm actually not expecting to burn all of the money on this project. But then as I'm working on the project, let's say I've recorded 50 hours so far from an actuals perspective. That alone should tell me, okay, well, I'm still under budget, right, because I've got actuals of 50 hours. My plan is 90. My baseline is 100. But my work percent complete is only at 30%. So I'm going to kind of go through these stories, and then the next slide I kind of evaluate sort of, what situation am I really in when I look at this. So if you're not doing any other math and you're saying, oh, 30% complete, yeah, 50, yeah, I'm under budget, I should be okay, right? But that's not actually the case in this situation. Project X, similar situation. I've got 100 hours set on baseline. I'm only planning to spend 50, but I've already spent 60 hours. So that alone tells me that combination is that my plan wasn't that good because I'm already over the plan, but I'm still under budget because I'm only at 60 versus the 100 hours at the baseline. From a work percent complete, I'm at 75%. So I'm kind of clipping along. So whatever I thought about putting this plan to place, I'm way off my plan, but can I tell if I'm going to go over budget based on these numbers? On Project Y, the baseline is 100 and the plan was 110, so I was actually planning to go over budget. So far I've only delivered 20, so you're early in the project, but I've only got 10% of the work complete. So I may not be worried about this because it's so early in the project, but even at this point I can have some leading indicators that would tell me from an ETC EAC perspective what to expect moving forward. And then finally, before I go on to sort of the full evaluation of these, Project Z has a baseline of 100. I'm planning out 100, so I'm spot on with my initial, go forward and conquer plan. I've worked 25 hours so far, so I'm about a quarter of the way through the project, and the work percent complete is a quarter of the way through. So this one is pretty easy to see. It's all apples to apples to apples along the way, so it feels like we're definitely on track with this. So from a battle scar perspective, if you look at these numbers and you just look at the numbers, you're like, okay, I'm under budget, except for the Project Y where I expected to go over budget, but it's still early on. I might be able to make it up, What you should do is you should be taking all these numbers and using them with each other to come up with a fuller story. And the fuller story is with this EAC ETC metric that I mentioned earlier. So in our first example, where we have the 100 hours of baseline and the 90 hours of plan, we're planning to go under budget, which is great. And we've worked only 50 so far. So yeah, we're still okay. We're under budget. But from my work percent complete, I think we're only 30% way through the project. Based on this information, if you rely on that work percent complete, I'm expecting to spend another 100 hours to complete this work, which means my EAC is 150, and I'm going way over budget at this point. So it's fine to see numbers sort of grow, but what you can't do is scramble at the end. You have to start looking forward and combining things with your work percent complete so that you get a better picture of really how far off are you starting to veer. And we're almost halfway through this project, so we have limited runway to correct action at this point. On Project X, I had already gone over the budget that I poorly planned with the 50 hours, but I am cranking on the work so that my work is 75% complete. So if you look at this number and the way the actuals are working out, even though it looks like bad because I'm over on my actuals, if you factor in the work percent complete progress, I'm actually expecting to finish this project at 80 hours. Now, that's still over my plan, but it's way under my baseline budget. I was given a 100 hours budget. So I'm maybe not that good at planning stuff out, but I am good at executing. And I was given enough of a budget buffer so that I was able to still come in at a nice perspective. So from that EAC calculation, I expect to spend another 20 hours and I'll be all done with everything. Okay. Now on Project Y was the one that I was planning to go over budget. And I'm early in the project. I'm at 20 hours in, and I've only got 10% of the work done. But if you sort of follow that early trend, that's already telling me that I'm going to double the budget. I am way over because I'm spending twice as much time to get the work done. And even that small amount of time on this larger project is something that you have a lot of runway now to correct it. So definitely take advantage of that runway and use these metrics because you can tell this is a disaster waiting to happen if you don't do something now. Okay. And then finally, the last one is, this is the utopia. We all try to shoot for this: apples to apples to apples to apples. 100 hours. I plan 100 hours. I work 25. But I'm smack on on track. So this one is the one that everyone strives for, and it's that unicorn project that you want to talk about. But you can see how the hours, if you didn't have that EAC ETC in there or didn't consider the work percent complete, there's really not too many of these cases here that you're like, wow, I'm okay on budget. I've still got 100 hours. You can't wait until the last minute. So you really need to take advantage of that forecasting in the ETC EAC. So before I would open up for questions, really understand that a project itself has a start, a middle, and an end. So what you want to do is at the start have a good battle plan. Make sure you understand what is going to happen on the project. And then as you're executing the project, make sure you have field measures in place. You have the scouts out there letting you know you're keeping information in check as you're delivering the projects. And you have counteroffensives ready to go so that you understand when you're trying to avoid risks. When you look like things are starting to go off track very quickly, how can you bring that on track? And make sure you certainly have the right tools to consume everything as your project progresses, so that you too can be victorious at the end of the day as you're delivering projects. So with that,